Back to Ourselves, Chapter 3. Society and Social Movements. Human Nature. While discussing the ideas presented in the first two chapters with people, the subject of so-called human nature has often been presented as an opposition. Based on Wikipedia's definition, human nature refers to the distinguishing characteristics, including ways of thinking, feeling, and acting, which humans tend to have naturally. The questions of whether these are truly fixed characteristics, what these natural characteristics are, and what causes them are among the oldest and most important questions in philosophy and science. The concept of human nature is traditionally contrasted not only with unusual human characteristics, but also with characteristics derived from specific cultures and upbringings. The nature versus nurture debate is a well-known modern discussion about human nature. These questions have particularly important implications in economics, ethics, politics, and theology. This is partly because human nature can be regarded as both a source of norms of conduct or ways of life, as well as presenting obstacles or constraints on living a good life. The complex implications of such questions are also dealt with in art and literature, which often explore the question of what it is to be human. As we discussed in previous chapters, the trap of words is playing a big role when addressing individual perspectives. Questions regarding the nature of humans are fascinating, as they're questions with paradoxes containing many pre-existing assumptions. Without a doubt, an individual believing that humans are naturally bad or evil will have difficulty finding motivation to be part of a society, a city, or a country. Moreover, the mental implication of thinking in such terms affects how individuals judge themselves and can affect almost every aspect of their lives. The idea that all human beings can be reduced to common traits is complicated and not related to what we call nature. We can say that humans have common habits related to their education and life experience, which will be true. We can even say that some distant people can happen to share essential traits unrelated to their education, which doesn't prove anything when addressing relative subjects as good and bad. Such similarities are part of what we call essential human traits, which are easy to find if you're searching for them. But starting a sentence with "all humans are" is impossible, as there will always be exceptions. In all the modern social sciences, including psychology, economics, and sociology, experiments based on statistics are a valid proof for that. In any study based on statistics, there are always a few individuals who don't score like most of the people. This is the main reason we use statistics in the first place. The number of existing variations in the human race is probably equal to the number of humans alive. We can also say that the number of similarities is endless, depending on what one is searching for. In general, looking at such an extreme metaphysical question, good and bad are two extremes, from a logical perspective will immediately reveal the problem. Using a sentence starting with "all the" is, by itself, a dangerous presumption when addressing questions about humans. Based on the statistics available from research, such a sentence will be invalid immediately, as any research finds individuals who behave differently. It's impossible to test and measure all humanity, which will always leave us a place to hope and speculate. Moreover, for every extreme case, we can find the opposite extreme. There are true sentences about all humans. It will be safe to say all individuals have a specific individual nature, that all humans have habits, and that there will always be an individual who reacts differently. Many experiments over the decades try to find common universal traits, values, and tastes. None of them found any universal characteristics. The unification of humans under one umbrella is healthy, as it's the key for healthy cooperation. In the end, we are similar as we are different. Concentrating on our common traits and goals is the first tool that can unify humans, while concentrating on our differences will undoubtedly create separation and fear. Additionally, two problems are completely ignored when discussing human nature. The first encompasses the assumptions related to concepts of the world and the term nature. The second relates to the misunderstanding of the terms good and bad. Let's start with the first issue. What do we mean when we say human nature? Studying human history and its development will quickly bring us to conclude that the idea of right and wrong changes based on periods and geographic. In some societies, values can stay or come and go, but this doesn't let us generalize anything. Like the rest of the environment, humans constantly evolve and change. Comparing early humans to modern ones shows how traits have drastically evolved and changed over time. Those changes represent the physical, psychological, and social aspects of humanity. It's safe to assume that even if we all had a common nature at the beginning of our evolutionary process, it's so far from the point where we are today, allowing evolution to create variations. We've been evolving for at least 30,000 years and have separated from one another, creating new habits and natural dispositions. On the other hand, if we search hard enough, we can find a certain trait that survived. We can try to compare ourselves to large apes. If someone put themselves next to one of our ape ancestors, they'd quickly identify similarities between humans and apes. Natural behaviors like sleeping, eating, and grouping are necessary in nature, not just for humans. This logic exercise shouldn't make you think we have the same nature as our ape cousins, but rather to doubt the blind belief that we still share a certain nature. Humans are different from other mammals and very unique. We operate based on mental processes involving the projection of possible futures in an abstract and advanced manner. Human nature is to think and imagine, which makes it neither good nor bad. Each object, animal, and entity has its nature. As long as something exists, it has a nature. It is obligatory. Based on this logic, we can say that all humans have their own nature, which doesn't allow us to conclude anything valuable about our common nature. The second, and probably more important point, is the paradox emerging from the question about human nature regarding the issue of good and bad. Those traits are abstract measurements prescribed by humans that represent two extremes and require each other to exist. Most philosophers handling the question of human nature do so by asking if humans are good or bad. This question is relative and based on terms that change based on culture and time. Good is a relative term, with its opposite called bad. Before even tackling this issue, it's easy to understand the basic problem when addressing such questions. To make it easy for a person to be good, one must be bad next to him. It's required when using comparative terms. In reality, if all people are good or all people are bad, they are neither, as they will be only people. Regarding humans and evolution in general, it's safe to say that evaluating humanity based on the observation of specific individuals will never hold for too long as humans change and evolve. Extremes like good and bad are used to understand the framework, not the individuals in it. Moreover, as good and bad are not absolute, comparable units, it's impossible to use them as anchors without giving a specific definition before starting the comparison. To understand this point better, let's take a case in which using absolute extremes is possible. We can use black and white as extremes for understanding the variety of colors, as colors are comparing themselves to black and white. One doesn't need to see white to identify a black color, as black can stand alone. On the other side, good is extremely relative. In many cases, good is a measurement humans use to express a trait compared to a similar previous experience. For example, a good grade can be relative to an absolute standard. It can be used in relation to grades other people, grades one achieved on previously, or grades an individual thought they would receive. A good kid, a good chair, a good day, and good weather are all relative to one of the above-mentioned options or to a subjective standard. Additionally, every outcome that isn't good doesn't make it automatically bad either. There's a range of realities that are part of a segment that is neither good nor bad. The vocabulary used to express those options varies between languages and cultures. In English, terms like okay, fine, and acceptable are all part of this spectrum. When it comes to humans and their nature, the usage of good and bad can be done in two ways, as a comparison to another human or as a fixed standard. If we use the first technique, the exercise will be absurd, as it requires a bad human to have a good human, which will bring us to the conclusion that there are all kinds of people. The other technique is even more absurd. Since the standards of good and bad must be fixed up front, based on a subjective measurement, or right and wrong. The fact that right and wrong change based on time and location will make the criteria undefinable in the first place. Norms regarding good and bad are different based on many variables, even based only on location. For example, in some cultures, a good person does what he believes is good and right, while in another culture, that behavior is seen as chaotic and anti-social. After all, it's a very self-concentrated and unpredictable behavior. Another example is the idea of failure. In the US and other countries worldwide, failure is seen as good because we can learn from failure. But in many European countries, failure is seen as bad and something to be ashamed of. Humans are what they are, meaning they're similar in some moments and traits and different in others. We can even say that all humans are similar and different from one another in certain moments and periods. Occupying ourselves with the wrong questions can make us reach false conclusions. The concept of human nature in terms of good and bad is a horrible way to lose faith in ourselves and the world around us. In reality, humans are good in certain moments and bad in others. Simply put, following years of social evolution and physical separation between humans over the globe, it's safe to say that human nature evolves based on their surroundings and that humans hold beliefs taught through education and society. Humans will naturally follow a certain behavior path based on their education and life experiences. As we are social animals acting based on our own predictions, made in one individual's mind and there alone, the importance of holding the right set of beliefs is crucial for building a society. A famous psychological saying coined by Abraham Kaplan and later quoted by Abraham Maslow in 1966 is called the law of instruments. In his quote, he said, "I suppose it is tempting, if the only tool you have is a hammer, to treat everything as it were nails." People who believe humans are naturally bad will find evidence everywhere, just as someone who believes everyone is good will find as much proof. When the two extremes of a philosophical argument are proven to be true, we can conclude that reality is somewhere in the middle. What, then, is the solution to our question related to human nature? To start, we can conclude that we don't possess a common nature to the point of generalizing humanity. We all share some traits beyond our control, but those traits also exist in other mammals, making them a natural behavior of mammals and not humans. We can also safely assume that most humans have some common inner mechanisms that guide them. Humans build their beliefs mainly based on their education, society, and personal perspective. Using terms like human nature is dangerous and misleading, as it fixes a set of beliefs in the individual's mind that represents a segment of reality, guiding his thought process and relation to society and himself. Throughout history, we can find acts that stem selfishness and self-interest. The interesting thing about those cases is that they normally refer to a minority of individuals and not society as a whole. Humans are unpredictable and don't have the capacity to predict the behavior of others. A moment of self-reflection will reveal moments and actions in an individual's life that surprise them, and moments in which their closest friends' actions surprise them. This doesn't mean that we don't possess general guidelines in our lives. It just means that sometimes we act based on different values. In the end, life is very dynamic and constantly changing. As we enter a new global era, it's important to understand that we are as similar as we are different. As we'll see in this chapter, the unification of humanity under one set of values isn't required to create a better world. Instead, we must accept humans regardless of their differences and similarities. Their belief that the majority of humans create a better future, and their willingness to oppress and ignore the minorities that try to separate us with violence and fear. We're all part of this planet, and we're all sometimes good and sometimes bad. Most people on this planet prefer to live peacefully in their homes and raise families while belonging to a constructive society, knowing they're part of something bigger than themselves. We are all indeed part of something bigger than ourselves. It is called humanity. For better or worse, this is what we have. We can choose to actively be part of it or ignore it, living in the small, isolated islands that we call our lives. Doing so won't change the fact that we're all in it together, and only together will we manage to create a better future for ourselves, our kids, and our planet. Strong societies and individuals. Society is a group of individuals who interact with each other persistently or a large scale, sharing the same geographical territory, typically but not necessarily subject to the same political authority and dominant cultural expectations. Society is the foundation that allows for the creation and maintenance of a government. Throughout history, ruling parties have varied in their size, form, and policy. Additionally, common interest is the foundation of any group, pack, or society, as its fundamental purpose is to promote self-interest in the form of large-scale cooperation. We can easily agree that without benefiting from joining a group, no individual will make the effort to create or maintain one in the first place. Based on this assumption, we can hope that in case no common interest will serve the individuals in society, a natural need for change will grow in society and bring individuals to act. Unfortunately, life has showed us that even if most of the population is aware that their interests are not served, a lack of alternatives makes the population accept the malfunction of their own societies by maintaining a passive and self-concentrated way of life. All social systems are the creation of humans and for their benefit. Based on this assumption, it would be absurd to assume that a system can be stronger than its individuals without the full agreement and cooperation of its participants from the first place. This point is very important, but many people forget it. A society can exist without a government, but a government cannot exist without a society. Following decades of social oppression and missteps, this basic rule, which should balance our societies, has been replaced by tyranny, fear, and separation. Another reason individuals may feel weak in front of their government is the size of the society itself. The creation of megacities is new, at least compared to how long humans have existed. The migration to cities and the creation of megacities, which became mega-countries, is recent, dating around 200 years. In small communities, and even in moderately sized cities, a social cycle exists in which everybody knows each other to a certain degree. Even if there is no direct connection, a second or third degree connection is enough to create a feeling of control. For example, if I do not know a person, but he is a friend of a friend, our willingness to cooperate will be immediate, as we believe we share a connection. The creation of mega-populations and mega-countries has left individuals feeling lost in the stream of difference and loneliness. This feeling is created in individual mind as he loses his capacity to affect the actions of most of the people around him. In this situation, an individual's belief that they can practically affect their society diminishes drastically, as society becomes an abstract term and not a practical one. As the population grows, this feeling grows in each person. The creation of mega-nations in the last 200 years has changed the structure and ideas standing behind our societies, which has changed our cities and the people in them. In this reality, mobs and self-interested rich parties can easily take control of the population due to the population weakness. Humanity has practiced social cooperation similarly for thousands of years without any drastic change. Hierarchies of the elite have been replaced by new ones, and empires have fallen and been replaced by the arrival of a new one. In old-style empires, the social structure of cities stayed the same regardless of the changing empire. In many cases, the empire itself didn't handle the day-to-day activities of its cities and didn't promote the creation of mega-societies. The Industrial Revolution, followed by the technological evolution of the last 150 years, has created a completely new reality, detached from the long evolving habit of humans. The cause for the creation of our societies and the tools used to maintain the old societies and economies aren't relevant to the current system nor to the needs of today's population. Factories have changed available occupations, bringing an influx of migrants to cities, while the creation of bureaucratic employment changed the employment requirement. The creation of megacities started with the Industrial Revolution, but evolved drastically only after the creation of the bureaucratic system, which dates back less than 100 years. As life became more complicated and our goals started to change, we got so used to the idea of being ruled that we forgot to ask ourselves questions about the primary purpose and role of the system itself. The creation of a single, powerful man holding concentrated power has evolved with the creation of societies. In a society of 1,000 people, there is no need for a concentration of power as long as all the individuals in it are loyal to the same values and principles. Natural courses of humanity have caused different empires to rise and fall as the needs of the people stopped being served by their rulers and became hostile to the prosperity of the masses. Following the mass expansion of monotheistic religions across the globe over at least 2,000 years, including the mass expansion of Christianity and Islam, the obedience to authority and fear of an omnipotent entity became the status quo. Over time, this system became a norm around the globe. Due to that shift, it seems Western society became preoccupied with the leaders of their systems instead of the systems themselves. This way of thinking is a deceptive separation created by individual fanatics for the sake of control. In the 21st century, individuals in Western society have adopted a dichotomic philosophy that is imposed by the media and government. In a time of crisis, the government will take a position of with us or against us. This tool of fear and extremism is the basic way humans are controlled by the elite, just like any other form of tyranny. This dichotomy promotes social acceptance of a structure in which there are only two kinds of people, oppressed and oppressors, good or bad, progress or destruction. This way of thinking has become a norm accepted by individuals, repeated on a normal daily basis. The development of the economical structure discussed in the second chapter drastically changed how citizens perceive their government, time, society, and purpose in life. The stronger the grip of the elite on the population, the more the individuals will develop a self-concentrated personality that can be manipulated by fear of the other and excitement of profit. Such a self-doctrine separates the individual from their society, disconnects them from their surroundings, and makes them develop a habit of obedience and fear over time. The merging of the economic market with the government has made the controller of the economy more powerful than the governments and citizens. The ability of a government to engage itself on the economic stage by taking loans is an anti-social system, as it's based on a fluctuating currency that represents nothing but itself. This global development created our current reality, in which our governments are pushed to engage in the loan path for the government's survival. This path will inevitably collapse while taking the majority of its citizens with it. This process will be reflected in the impoverishment and misery of the population while allowing the elite to survive and levitate above the economy itself. The massive loans taken by governments to cover their debts are a spiral of inability to find a better solution. As the loans are taken mainly to cover interest rates and not to repay the loans, a philosophy of let's solve the problem tomorrow has been created. This reality leads to devaluing the individual's time, property, security, and self-image. In 2017, the governments in Western society became an institution that see everything and judged without the possibility to object or argue. They punish citizens as they please while rewarding their blind obedience. In the daily life of a Westerner, the local police and the enforcement entity are the judges and the executioners of the law. In many cases, the economic capacity of an individual will determine the result of its judgment, and not the justice principle. As society is a living and evolving organism, there's no wrong way to evolve as long as the capacity to change exists. Nassim Nicholas Taleb describes a theory of anti-fragility in his wonderful book, Anti-Fragility, beautifully explaining the idea of inevitable change and the West's fear of new possibilities. The idea of anti-fragility dictates that change in life is inevitable and should be seen as a constant to look forward to, as it brings new opportunities. A person or organization that tries to preserve the current reality will inevitably collapse. The modern economic and political doctrine is based on a trial to maintain its existence and to fear change. A society that doesn't understand the necessity of change and the opportunities that it brings with it is a regressive society that will make the process of change harder for itself. The evolution of our governing system has brought many people to see subjects like the economy and government as complex topics that should be avoided. Such a mentality is antisocial. Weak and confused individuals create weak societies. The willingness and ability of individuals to understand and engage in social activities that create change are the keys to creating strong societies. The technological evolution. Unifying humans under a globalized system is a natural process evolving rapidly in our generation. The implications and inventions following the technological revolution aren't complete. Good tools can be used badly in the process of understanding the power of those tools. These days, people approach the majority of novelties with little skepticism, which turns to over-assuming the positives of the new tools. Every revolution requires adaptation. When it comes to changes like the internet, smartphones, and other recently developed tools, it's safe to say that extreme usage will be necessary before understanding the proper use of these technologies. This process also occurred after the Industrial Revolution. In the early days of the Industrial Revolution, the overuse of machines and overwork of people was disastrous until humans understood the effects of overusing those tools and created laws to govern their usage. The technological revolution is, by far, the most remarkable tool for creating a global world, but it's essential to understand how to use new technology and, more importantly, how not to utilize it. The accessibility of information in a fraction of a second and the communication of individuals with their society without the need for knowledge or physical movement has fundamentally changed the needs of Western society. The more connected a person is to their society by indirect means of communication, the lonelier they will become. When an individual spends most of their time closed in their home, they create a cage for themselves, and this separation is antisocial. An individual born in a metropolis is not only living as a lion born in a cage, but is also convinced it's the best way of living without understanding the alternatives. In this reality, social growth is minimal, as a society requires its people to actively exist for growth. When a society gives the individual an unrealistic, detached feeling of unity and community while sitting in their home, their capability to understand right and wrong changes. In this case, the media will dictate right and wrong without any serious objection from the individuals. As we can observe in our society today, most people don't know what's good for themselves, but are confident in their own opinions when it comes to their personal beliefs about what's good for others. If a society degenerates to living individuals living in their golden cages, humans will progressively forget that their most significant strength is to create. The technological revolution, as a tool of mass control and isolation of individuals, has brought Western society to a new era unlike anything we've seen before. We're a population living with a feeling that something is wrong while we're busy telling ourselves that everything is under control and that we have freedom. The individual's capability to notice that the system is malfunctioning didn't vanish, but the feeling of responsibility as part of society and the will to fight for a better society no longer exists. The need for a populace that acts when they suffer injustice is fundamental for progress and democracy. As our friends, money, and achievements become immaterial and technology rules our lives, our ability to distinguish between what's real and not becomes blurred. The majority of the people living in the West are terrorized by events happening far away, controlled by people they have never actually met, dreaming about places they've never seen, and trying to look and sound like people they've never met. The use of new technology is one of the tools available for our unification. Used in the wrong way, this tool can become our controller. The need for a life in the physical world is essential for maintaining good societies with healthy individuals. It's not a system that should tell us what to do or how to do it. It's us, as a community, that should support each other and keep each other on a healthy and progressive path. As the world is controlled by a small elite, doing everything in its power to isolate us for the sake of controlling us, we must understand the dangers and benefits of the technological revolution to shape our future. A good standard can be fixed, the standard of reality. Such a standard can be seen as follows. If technological tools promote actual physical achievements that can be seen and measured in real life, those tools are used well. If the achievements stay in the immaterial world's domain, the tool's use is unhealthy and destructive. Technology brought humanity tools that changed every aspect of human life. Without any doubt, it's an additional stage in our communication evolution. Like any other tools invented by humans, these are good as long as they serve us, but they become a danger when necessary for survival. The path we're walking is clear. It follows a plan made by people with the knowledge, power, and funds for massive execution. The violence of today is a tool to make individuals terrified and terrorized in their own homes. Violence is one of the tools of the ancient world as separation, tyranny, capitalism, and egoism ruled all societies. These aren't required in a world where we understand we're all part of the same global society. Individualism. The ability of the masses to successfully cooperate is based on the willingness of individuals to cooperate. The various new platforms of communication, the knowledge available to the mass market, and our natural capacity for creation are the fundamental tools needed to create a necessary change. The knowledge of individuals regarding the history of their people and the history of humanity is essential to building a clear identity. By understanding history, one can learn not only what we have tried to do, but also what we have never been. In the way history is taught these days, the information given in formal institutions concentrates on the war and disasters of others while prizing our own victories. History is not concentrated on the temporary success of one group or another, but it's a process in which humanity evolved out of trial and error. Thanks to new technology, we can learn and share information internationally, allowing us to observe the evolution of humanity from all over the world as one history. Preaching history out of a philosophy of fear and separation will inevitably create a general feeling of terror and misery. Learning history in such a way can only send one message to the receiving population regarding our history. It is a matter of time before someone will come to take our place. With such a set of beliefs, general cooperation is, without a doubt, impossible. Only by seeing human history as a process of trial and error will individuals possess the tools of knowledge and freedom essential for creating a better future. The more awareness we have regarding our existence and our history, the closer we get to the understanding that peace and prosperity are possible by sacrificing the tyranny of the few and their lust for domination. This will create a better future for all. An individual without a clear understanding of human history lacks the tools necessary to understand where they come from, which makes it impossible for them to understand where they are now. This lack of knowledge will inevitably extinguish the individual's capacity to understand where they would like to go in the future. Individuals in such a reality will naturally tend to follow the system imposed on them and focus on themselves. This self-concentration process has been called by many individuals, a term used in a negative light by some and positive one by other. I believe the reason for it is that two kinds of individualism exist. They are constructive individualism and destructive individualism. It is essential to understand the difference between the two, as one is the key to a strong society, and the second is one of the causes of its destruction. Wikipedia defines individualism as individualism is the moral stance, political philosophy, ideology, or social outlook that emphasizes the individual's moral worth. Individualists promote the exercise of one's goals and desires, value independence and self-reliance, and advocate that the interests of the individual take precedence over the state or a social group. They oppose external interference upon one's own interests by society or institutions such as the government. Individualism is often defined in contrast to totalitarianism, collectivism, authoritarianism, communitarianism, tribalism, and more corporate social forms, which is, in many cases, championed by an anti-social interest group. Individualism makes the individual its focus, and so starts with the fundamental premise that the human individual is of primary importance in the liberation struggle. Classical liberalism, existentialism, and anarchism are examples of movements that take the human individual as a central unit of analysis. Individualism thus involves the right of the individual to freedom and self-realization. I define constructive individualism as self-aware behavior in which an individual accepts and understands themselves, their abilities and limitations, and takes active part their society based on the principle that dictates that a strong society requires strong individuals. On the other side, the individualism preached these days is very far from this concept. It's an individualism based on the need to satisfy one's wishes and goals while ignoring the needs of society. This destructive individual can be defined as self-concentration and the pursuit of personal ambition while ignoring the needs and nature of society. The symptoms of such a philosophy are clear and will inevitably bring individuals to overconsume and develop a feeling of omnipotence while criticizing anything that's different from what they have. The emptiness that evolves over time will cause individuals to fear what they do not understand while ignoring clear signs of self and social destruction. Kids are naturally born with an inclination toward constructive individualism, as they are mainly aware of their perspective and naturally try to be an active part of their surroundings. Alas, a large number of adults living in the Western world not only hold values of destructive individualism, but also defend those standards proudly when discussing the subject. Looking at our history, such self-concentrated, destructive individualism was held mainly by a small group of rich elite in power living by privilege, maintained by the impoverishment and enslavement of the rest of the population. It was a minority mind for a very long period. Unfortunately, the recent development is Western civilization created a reality in which this destructive philosophy became the norm for the populace. It evolved in the West only in the last 70 years. Many factors affected this trend and supported it during its spread. The rise of the middle class following the development of democracies, the beginning of cheap manufacturing in faraway countries, the rise of the standard of living, and the adaptation of consumerism are only a few factors that pushed such negative behavior. Retrospectively, it's hard to conclude if the spread of the destructive individualism was a cause or an effect. The only thing we can say with certainty is that in 2017, the socially detached, self-concentrated, wasteful, and violent way of life became a new standard that is held and even praised by many. Two other changes left a vacuum in the human mind that needed to be filled, which helped in the rise of such a social standard. The first is the fall of nationalism in the second half of the 20th century, and the second is the lack of religious belief of the new generation. Nationalism and monotheism will, first of all, social structures. Nationalism, by definition, is a social concept that concentrates on the unification and often supremacy of a specific nation. The monotheistic religions demand a lot from its follower, but nevertheless, the amount of social duties and activities required instantly create a social order for its followers. The fall of those two concepts created an unfulfilled need and started a quest for an alternative path in the individual's lives. Looking at it honestly, it's easy to see how, following the fall of nationalism and monotheism, the dedication to money and self-interest are more acceptable concepts for Westerners, as they have traits similar to the old concepts. The pursuit of power, control, and domination was a big part of the European-American culture to start with, as they were the natural way of life in Europe for hundreds of years. Looking at the evolution of individualism, it can be said that nationalism and monotheistic religions were the poles holding the social values of individuals in the Western world. Without those two, all that's left from the rise of the Western Empire is greed, power, and domination based on ignorance, fear, and separation. Undoubtedly, some positive and constructive social values have remained in small and medium communities. Individuals raised in small and medium communities, detached from the media and aggressive social lifestyle, still hold many positive social values not found in big cities. The creation of megacities, the evolution of the media, and the power grab of the bureaucratic governments have left individuals with few tools to understand and obtain positive social values. In the last 50 years, the way society operates changed drastically and has become more complex and demanding. Such reality makes individuals feel small and incapable as the systems become abstract and violent. The rise of destructive individualism is exactly the separative philosophy needed for the reign of tyranny. We can see that many people living in big cities don't know or care about their neighbors, are concerned about and afraid of other ethnic group around them, and see the government as a faraway entity, concentrated on promoting its own self-interest at the cost of the well-being of its subjects. Prolonged period of living in such a system has made many believe that the best way to handle reality is to concentrate on the self-promotion and security of specific individuals while concentrating on small and local ways to obtain money. The overconsumption, social status achieved by materialism, and the need of many individuals for a faraway vacation are all symptoms of a dying social structure. It's one thing to work hard and to save money for hard days, and another to work hard for the sake of buying things one doesn't need for social acceptance. In such a society, the willingness and capacity of individuals to create constructive and active social movements is small to non-existent. Moreover, if a person needs to continue to work only for the sake of maintaining shelter and obtaining food, it's safe to say that the individual is part of 21st century Western slavery. After all, if the only way an individual can survive is to enter the working cycle, and the working cycle is built in a way that promises the worker will never have enough for their basic needs, by any standard, it can be called slavery. The fact that a person can choose his occupation in the system does not make it less of the slavery system. It's not surprising that in such a slavery system, each person adopt destructive individualism. It's important to make the separation between constructive and destructive individualism. A deep understanding of the concept of individualism and its role in society will bring us to discover how verbally close the two terms are while practically representing extremes. A strong society requires strong individuals who understand their place, roles, and capacity in an active society. Without such individuals, society will degenerate to become a blind herd, led by any entity that presents enough power and consistency. A society without strong and active individuals won't have the capacity to evaluate and change its governing system and its norms as needed, which is contradictory to some basic presumptions in a society that tries to be free and democratic. Destructive individualism is probably one of the main tools needed to weaken a society and cause its individuals to lose the tools normally used to maintain autonomy and power in a democratic society. Self-concentrated, over-materialistic individuals who are mainly preoccupied with their social acceptance exhibit anti-social behavior patterns. An individual who sees social isolation as the end of everything they value and would rather live as a slave to a system than die a free master of their own existence will become the engine of the slavery of a social system. Many will say that individuals in the Western world are living today better than kings 300 years ago. That's probably true if measured in terms of technological development, which proves that as a species, we evolved drastically, and not that we are less slaves than we used to be. In terms of free time, basic needs, and self-autonomy in front of our government, we are not evolving and are regressing. All those factors are essential for maintaining the power of the rich elite. It secures the functional continuation of the mechanism in future years. In case of any trial of change, the capacity of the media to expose individuals to threats and extreme violence promises the fear and obedience of the masses. It's not the first time in history that an elite group has enslaved populations for the sake of their own power and profit, but it's probably the first time that so many individuals are busy telling themselves that this is the best way to live. As mentioned above, any social movement requires motivated, self-aware individuals to succeed. The separation, fear, and ignorance of the majority of the Western civilization is not only maintaining the tyrannical system and the enslavement of themselves, but is also the main reason no social change is possible. The Chronicle of Social Change. As long as the elite maintain a fair feeling with their subjects regarding the standard of living, the law of common interest will create a society in which the exploitation of the many is accepted for the minimal comfort and illusion of security. Looking at history, we can see this balance requires a unique kind of elite who understands the importance of this balance. Regardless of which society we decide to look at during history, there has always been a small group in charge of ruling the majority of the population. Nevertheless, it's always a matter of time until the balance between those groups breaks and requires a social change, as nothing stays constant. This process is unavoidable, as over time one of the groups will require more than it previously required for its survival, creating an immediate shortage for the other. The studies of such moments in history hold the keys to understanding the nature of our social changes. For any social movement to be launched, a general feeling of unfairness has to be created in one of the groups, which requires the termination of the existing system. There are two options for terminating the existing system. A movement created by the population itself against the system, which destroys the existing system and creates a new system in their image. Self-destruction by the elite in power. In many cases, the system's self-destruction by the elite and its reconstruction will emerge when the elite can no longer exploit the masses and maintain power. When the system is destroyed by the elite, as seen in the West today, the change and construction of the new system will be controlled and maintained by the few for their own benefit. In these cases, it can be assumed that the new system will fundamentally erect itself on the same principles. Based on the exploitation of the many for the creation of additional power will create a cycle of impoverishment and enslavement. This endless cycle is contradictory to the nature of the individual need for society, as it's a cycle that doesn't benefit most of its people. We can see examples of this cycle in Western history from 1200 AD. It is a period considered the Dark Age of Europe, as the domination by the Catholic Church maintained itself with different leaders and countries for the sake of the elite. Other examples are the enslavement of the African people in the early days of the Western salve trade, the peasants of pre-revolutionary Russia, and today's modern enslavement of the masses in the European community. The tools of violence and intimidation are fascinating when it comes to maintaining power. Unfortunately, we will not discuss this subject, as it will take us away from the purpose of this book. It is possible to find many political and historical books describing and discussing those matters, including The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein and Wage of Rebellion by Chris Hedges. Violence and intimidation are easy to create and effective in maintaining power. Research shows that to create constant fear in an individual's mind, disproportionate violence must be used first, followed by unpredictable repetition, while emphasizing a clear understanding of the outcomes. One of the founders of cognitive psychology, Martin Seligman, discovered a general behavior called learned helplessness in 1967. Learned helplessness is a behavior typical to animals that have endured repeated painful or otherwise aversive stimuli without having the capacity to escape or fight it. Following enough repetitions, the person or animal will develop a pattern of behavior in which he does not fight the pain any longer. In other words, a person exposed to various direct or indirect terror and intimidation, while learning that it is impossible to prevent or affect the situations, will unconsciously believe they have lost control, giving up trying to fight or change the situation. The violence and intimidation can be seen in many other fields in which the individual will gradually lose their belief in their capacity to make a change in their country, city, community, and in themselves. David Graeber wrote a book called The Utopia of Rules on technology, stupidity, and the secret joys of bureaucracy, which discusses the evolution of the bureaucratic system in the 21st century and its effect on the individual and society. The creation of a complicated, changing bureaucratic system doesn't benefit its citizens and creates a system in which the individuals become lost in a system that they fear, dislike, and don't understand. By creating a system maintained by force, terror, isolation of the individual, and their enslavement to the system, inevitably, with time, a need to increase the amount of violence and intimidation will grow as a necessity due to the adaptation process of the general population. If true, simple observation based on this standard will allow us to identify societies that are currently in this cycle. A simple criterion will be to measure the amount of physical enforcement by the government while correlating it to the individual's capacity to maintain a better way of life. If the first is increasing while the second is declining, it is safe to conclude that the system is an antisocial system ruled by the elite and maintained by the enslavement of the many. A society living in such a system is doomed to have an unstable government, an unproductive society, and a fluctuating economy. Throughout history, social systems that increasingly deserve the masses are inevitably demolished and destroyed by an active population. The amount of exploitation and violence applied by the elite pushing the populace to rise varies. In most cases, the more time it takes for the populace to rise against their oppressive rulers, the less likely they will have the means and power to bring about accountable and constructive change. Active populations have two options to demolish the current system. We will group the movements as a constructive movement and a depressing movement by the populace. The distinction is simple and based on the fundamental idea of why the destruction must occur and how it is done. The concept of individuals acting out of rage or anger is known and can be observed as an instinctive act based on momentary impulses of violence and unplanned action. Such movements may randomly yield positive results, but assuming that there is a lesson to learn from it will be similar to claiming that a person believes there is a connection between their random appearance in a bar and the reason for hearing a specific song. An important assumption at this point is the fact that by doing random acts at a random moment, random positive results will appear, which doesn't mean that it's a good course of action. On the other hand, maintaining a good, constant philosophy of action can bring unwanted outcomes in the process. It doesn't change the fact that by constantly practicing a certain philosophy of life, various results will appear, which, if done right, will bring the outcome needed. It can be better understood in the following example. If a wall of bricks is standing still and people randomly are passing and hitting the wall, at a certain point, the hit of a random person will break the wall. The only real conclusion that can be taken out of this experience is not that the individual in question has an enormous power or an unseen purpose, but that a wall hit repeatedly will eventually break. On the other side, hitting a wall of bricks with a big hammer will, in most cases, break the wall in the first hit. A specific example in which the hit with the hammer will not break the wall will not prove in any case that the hammer is not a good solution. In this case, another parameter can affect the failure of the specific hit, which doesn't make the tool less useful. Going back to our population, a depressive movement is, in most cases, a violent and random act that starts as frustration and hatred directed at an abstract entity. Normally fueled by mobs and extremists to promote their agendas, these movements concentrate on the immediate benefits of the act itself. Most of these movements finish with an extreme act of violence against the population itself by the ruling elite or by the creation of a new system ruled by mobs. For the majority of the population, the act of violence by the government or the new ruling mob makes no difference, as they look and feel the same. Both are oppressive acts by the ruling elite on its population. The recreation of a system by the mob is a recreation that is no different from the system destroyed. Those mobs and extremists have nothing to lose by creating such a movement, as they'll benefit from the chaos created by the movement or finish as leaders of the new system. It is a win-win situation for them. In any case, possible gains compared to the potential losses are unproportionable and indeed attractive for any mob group. Those movements that normally start following a violent act by the ruling elite develop as acts of rage and ignorance, as they don't attack the actual social problem that requires a controlled change by removing the social virus while maintaining the survival of the society. In most cases, the movement concentrated on specific, temporary events for the general destruction of the whole system will pursue destruction for the sake of destruction. In most of those depressive movements, the leaders are normally local mobs and self-interested people acting mainly out of interest for power and profit. Those individuals or organizations use the general frustration and confusion of the masses for pure destruction and chaos. As the power and the tools of the local ruling elite are normally violent, the superiority of the ruling elite is certain in case of a violent encounter. The elite that holds power through violence are not only masters of those tools, but also invest in upgrading those tools to maintain power. It is easy to understand how an uprising by the populace based on tools of violence is the weakest attack possible, as it's the field of domination for the elite. The lack of understanding regarding this point is, by itself, a tool of the elite. Moreover, revolting through violence will serve the elite, as they require a demonstration of power once in a while to maintain their status. In other words, creating a violent movement against a government will benefit the ruling elite if the movement fails to dismantle the system. Using violence against the ruling elite can be compared to an unprofessional person believing that they will be able to defeat a professional in their field just because they think it's the right thing to do. As we discussed earlier, a violent revolt can randomly be successful, which doesn't allow us to arrive at any conclusion except the fact that even professional people can make mistakes. Depressive movements got their name based on the consequences of the movement itself. As we mentioned previously, when a social movement is violent, there are 3 possible outcomes. 2 involve complete system destruction, and 1 involves the movement's failure. In case the movement fails due to the use of extreme violence by the government or the failed maintenance of the violent movement itself by the masses, the oppression of society is inevitable, both mentally and physically. Such a failure will undoubtedly increase the power of the local ruling elite, decrease the individual's confidence and belief in their ability to control themselves, and impose an economic burden on the individuals for the reconstruction needed following the destruction. The failure of a movement, thanks to an unproportional act of violence, increases the ruling elite's power in all cases. The spirit of the individuals who engage themselves as an active part of their society in the revolt will not only abuse their will of active participation, but also adopt a feeling of learned helplessness that isolates and depresses their mentality. In case of a few failures of violent movements, the individual will no longer be open to new, positive alternatives. In case a population fails to revolt, not only will the individuals in it be smashed and terrorized by their own government, but the cost of the reconstruction will be so high and aggressive that it will strengthen the ruling elite. If a violent movement does destroy the system, there are two possible long-term outcomes. In many cases, the masses don't usually understand the destruction process or lack the knowledge and understanding of successful reconstruction. This is seen in many anti-governmental movements. The majority of the populace involved is well aware of what they don't like about the current system and have an abstract idea of how they would like their new life to look, but don't possess the knowledge and understanding of what to do, how to do it, and the actual cost. As the movement itself has been pushed and fueled by self-interested mobs and extremists, the first possible outcome is the creation of a new government in the shape of the mob and the extremists themselves. The creation of a new system by a small group of self-interested people is no different than the previous system, which is fundamentally contradictory to the primary idea of the mass uprising. In such a reality, the outcome's effect on most individuals wouldn't be very different if the movement failed instead. Individuals will not only develop learned helplessness regarding their power and influence on their social system, but also feel all political movements lack efficiency and purpose. The second possible outcome of a successful movement created by local mobs and extremists is the lack of leadership in the new system. This will make it impossible to reconstruct a social system. In this case, a period of chaos and violence will be created, promoted, and pushed by the people controlling the natural resources and the largest quantity of armies and guns. In this case, the individual's standard of living and comfort will decrease, inevitably leaving citizens with a sense of failure. In this case, the individual will not only learn that they don't have the power to shape their social system, but will potentially conclude that accepting it is the best way to react to an oppressive government. The two outcomes described above are all, retrospectively, movements that can be classified as depressive, as the majority of the population will not benefit from its outcome. It is easy to understand how those outcomes do not, in any case, promote or bring positive results to the society itself. Looking back at many social movements in the last 500, it is easy to understand how most of them can be categorized as depression. As mentioned above, an alternative exists for social movements trying to make a real change. Not every bad rebellion fails, and not every well-executed rebellion will succeed. The purpose of this book is not to arrive at conclusions regarding the correct way to create social movements, but to understand the foundation required for a social movement to construct a better system that benefits its people in case of a successful movement. It is possible to arrive at several conclusions regarding what is necessary for the sake of creating a constructive movement. The movement should not start out of rage, anger, or frustration. The movement's leader should not be alternative small groups of self-interest like mobs or extremists. The main tool of the movement should not be violence. The movement should not promote hate and or extremism. The movement should not destroy for the sake of destruction, but should destroy only as necessary. No abstract vision should lead the movement. Now that we have created those guidelines, let's examine the requirements of a constructive movement. The movement needs to emerge out of a conscious understanding of the problems in society. The movement should articulate the problems clearly and simply. The action of the movement should be organized with a clear purpose. The movement's leaders should be part of the populace and reflect the general well-being of society. A deep understanding of the system's weaknesses is required to find alternatives to violence. The movement should benefit the people. A clear plan should exist regarding what needs to be changed and how to change it. The reconstruction plan following the movement's success should be clear and simple to understand for the sake of the population before any action is taken. To promise a successful constructive movement, we must answer 4 questions before any action is taken. 1. What is wrong with the system? 2. How can we replace it? 3. What alternative will replace it? 4. How will the alternative be constructed? A movement's ability to articulate those answers will determine its success. Those questions are important as they should build the core activity of the revolt itself. Those answers will imply practical actions necessary for the success of the revolt. The necessity to construct clear answers is not only important for the followers, but also to avoid actions that are not part of those core activities. The first 2 questions are important for creating the movement itself and realizing the possibilities involved. The success of the revolt by itself is not enough for the movement to be constructive. Suppose the movement fails to rebuild a better system. In that case, a gap will be created in the governing domain, which will bring violence and domination of an external elite, as discussed above. The movement must know what alternative they'll use to replace the system for 2 reasons. The first is not demolishing the entire system, but keeping the best parts of the current system and not exhausting resources on the wrong targets. As any movement will require resources for demolition and then reconstruction, the resources available for the movement are, by definition, limited. The capacity to make the right move will allow the movement to save resources in both the processes of demolition and construction, and will allow them to concentrate resources on important problems. Understanding the future system allows for quick and efficient reconstruction of the system. The definition of a constructive movement is a group created by the people to develop a better future for their societies. Understanding the problem, the possible realistic alternatives, the actions needed to replace the system, and clear steps for reconstruction all create a successful revolution. How to create social change. Change is a natural process fueled by trial and error. Some changes benefit humankind as individuals and as societies. Others benefit only a small part of individuals. As this process requires errors, it should be natural to monitor the process of social evolution, looking at where we've arrived and deciding, in case we are not happy with its results, declare an error has been made. If such a conclusion has been reached, the natural process should be the destruction of the current system while keeping the positive aspects achieved and rebuilding based on the needs of society. How can this be done? Every conversation I've had regarding potential social changes has been opposed by a certain philosophy that concludes the masses are idiots and too small to create a real change. Looking at society in that manner is a wonderful example of learned helplessness and ignorance regarding the nature of social movements. Without any doubt, any change requires time and action. Changing the habits of one individual can take months and even years. Changing the habits and structure of a society can require years or decades if done peacefully and in the right way. The right way refers to the positive outcome retrospectively. A social movement requires several steps. The first step is the understanding and will of the individual to change their current reality. The will and understanding of an individual will not always lead to actions. Nevertheless, it is required if we are to engage in social change. Based on the history of social movements, to engage people in a social movement, it is important that 1. The individual feels that they have a choice. 2. The individual holds a simple vision and set of rules. 3. The individual has a feeling of fairness and believes in the movement's success. Looking at the movements created in societies and nations, it can be observed that there are 5 kinds of groups needed for maintaining its existence. These groups are all required for the existence and success of the movement itself. These groups are a core structure for any social movement, big or small. Understanding these groups and their connection is essential for the sake of creating and maintaining any kind of movement. 1. Group A, the naturally idealistic philosophers. This group has the capacity to create new ideas and is willing to practice its philosophy as long as there's a willing leader. With a leader at the head of the movement, this group of people will support and maintain movements as consultants and will support the expansion of the organization as active supporters in society. 2. Group B, the natural leaders. These individuals hold a range of leadership traits. From the moment a strong leader takes a clear path, the rest of the individuals participating in that group will support the system by promoting and maintaining the organization itself as sub-leaders of sub-movements. 3. Group C, the anti-movement group. This group of people actively opposes the movement. As people are hungry for information and are constantly searching for new ideas, by promoting an anti-movement, they're still promoting the ideas of the movement, but from a different angle. The more aggressive the anti-movement, the stronger the need of the followers to have an opinion. Researchers have proven that we tend to remember the surprising events of our lives. By making a movement seem abnormal or dangerous, the need of the follower to group with an extreme opinion will be created. 4. Group D, the followers. The followers are all the individuals that create the masses. Those individuals will follow from the moment the idea is practically constructed and existing in a way that will demand from them the minimum. As a first stage, only holding the idea and presenting it in public is sufficient. They will naturally follow. When a big enough stream of followers joins the system, the movement of the rest of the followers will naturally emerge. For this to happen, an anti-movement group is required. 5. Group E, the passive group. This group exists in all social movements. Most of the individuals of the previous groupings will join a movement actively. In any movement, several individuals will naturally prefer not to participate as long as it does not come literally to their front door. These groups create and maintain each other during the process of a social movement. Group A represents a modest group of individuals who are aware of their society and thinking about improving it. During periods in which no leader exists to actively promote and lead the new ideas, the majority of this group feels weak in both society and in government. In many cases, this group will try to live their social life with a minimal attachment to the current system and will be called dreamers, idealists, hippies, outsiders, etc. In all cases, it's not the first person who thought about an idea that is rewarded or thanked for its social practice, but the first person who practically tried, built, wrote, acted, or manifested the idea. In case of the arrival of a leader, Group A will actively support the leader in creating social awareness and will help attract followers. Group B consists of individuals from Group A who can create followers. Most of these individuals are naturally charismatic and have well-developed philosophies about society. If a leader appears without individuals of Group A to support them, the movement itself will be weak and short. As long as the leaders can engage the individuals from Group A to become followers under their leadership, the leader can create a movement. This is seen in all kinds of movements, where the leader's power to maintain their leadership is based on the power of their advisors and executors. Group C is a very interesting group as it is paradoxical to itself in most cases. Every change is an opportunity for leadership for a thinker from Groups A and B. But a movement promoting anti-movement ideas to disrupt another group is just a reaction, not a true movement. The anti-movement group consisted of individuals from Group A who, with the leader's appearance from Group B, decided to protest against said movement at all costs, because a movement can only maintain itself if both the good and bad of the movement are acknowledged. The anti-movement will inevitably help followers construct ideas, which is required for being part of the movement itself. In recent years, the system's leaders have developed such an understanding that they are promoting themselves positively and negatively for the sake of publicity. Magnificent examples of this include Donald Trump's campaign for the presidency of the United States and the reinforcement of the Catalan independence movement following the opposition of the Spanish government. Group D represents the majority of society. It's important to mention that different people will take on an active or passive roles in different movements. The parameters that will engage individuals to join the group are mainly based on their knowledge in the field, the belief that the individual have the power to create change, and their willingness to sacrifice the current reality. Followers are a group. As in all groups, the individual's capacity in the group itself diminishes to optimize his abilities in other aspects. Group D comprises individuals from Group E who decided to change how they live for the sake of the movement. A few parameters need to exist for the individual from Group E to pass to the follower group. The movement must have a clear structure. The leaders of the movement need to be acknowledged and well known. The movement's platform needs to be clear and articulated in ways that will be easily repeated by the individual. There's a clear understanding and repetition of the purpose of the movement and how it will change the world's reality. There's an active opposition group with a clear message that needs to exist to create opinion and social conversation. There's a clear understanding of what is required from the individual for joining the movement and an easy way to check who is part of the group and who isn't. Looking back on the Nazi movement in Europe and the American movement in the Cold War, it could be assumed that the creation of a clear enemy was necessary for the creation of a strong social movement. Such an argument can be disputed under the critique that for a person to follow a vision, they only require a clear end or a clear understanding of the changes created by the movement. If that is indeed enough, creating an enemy for unification is a very efficient tool of fear and terror for the sake of unification. Still, by itself, it is not obligatory for a natural movement to exist. It can even be said that unless a clear enemy is knocking at the door, creating a far-off enemy for unification based on fear is required only in case the movement is unnatural and unnecessary for the population itself. Violence can only bring violence, and fear can only bring destruction and separation, which are not productive for the individual or for the society itself in the long term. In many cases concerning social movements, the easy way is not the right way. It is indeed easier to scare people and separate them than it is to make them understand each other and show tolerance. In all cases, hatred built in an individual perspective for a social movement will not vanish following the movement's success, reinforcing a feeling of separation and a need to maintain something to hate. As societies are changing based on the changes created by the masses themselves, it can be assumed that a movement will be successful only when the masses decide to follow it. A fascinating observation is that before the inception of any movement, we are all start in Group E. All groups start as passive in their societies. Individuals evolve and change, while the society around them constantly changes parallelly. Looking at Western society, the majority of citizens are passive in their societies and their movements. In a society where the elite controls individuals' capacity to evolve from Group E and monitor the evolved groups, the governing authority controls the ability of the movements inside of its societies to evolve in the first place. Such a reality is violent and antisocial as it oppresses social change. Social movements are the core of any social structure. Those movements are natural, necessary, and required for the people in each society to change and evolve. A few factors can manipulate the use of this knowledge. The primary manipulation is the creation of movements that don't address the problems, but rather the consequences of the problems. Another way is to push individuals to be part of a movement for the sake of it, which creates a blind following based on the social need of the individual and not their willingness to change their reality. Grouping many problems under one movement is a manipulation of the social movement concept, as it aims to group as many people as possible who come from different motives and for different purposes. A good example of this is the numerous organizations trying to fight the horrible consequences of the capitalistic pursuit of profit by attacking its consequences. Organizations occupied with saving the planet, Greenpeace, saving the animals, vegetarian movement, humanist movements, Occupy Wall Street, and many more are all spending their resources fighting the consequences of human trafficking, the industrial food chain, the concentration of power, and destruction of the globe, which are all outcomes of the greed that runs our lives and destroys our planet. Understanding social movements is a tool. As such, it is neither bad nor good. Its usage determines its values. Without any doubt, weak and ignorant populations are easier to manipulate for the sake of personal gain. The education of the population and the creation of clear, measurable standards that will be constantly monitored are required to promise effective movements that benefit the population. The key to any successful social movement is its individuals. Strong individuals will create a strong society. This is a personal responsibility we forgot about long ago, which caused us to be unable to articulate our problems and feel incapable of changing on a social scale. The purpose of a society is to benefit its individuals. The purpose of a government is to benefit its society. And the purpose of the individual in a society is to monitor and engage in benefiting the structure and activities of its government. The importance is not to make a social movement or be part of one, but to determine which movements can and will achieve a positive social change. Time for a social change. Looking back on the Western world's history, it is easy to observe that for thousands of years, humanity lived similarly to previous generations. Human progress in the last 300 years has changed every aspect of our lives. Those changes have affected our society, monetary system, government, and the individual's general perspective of themselves, their county, and their surroundings. 4 different developments changed our reality. Those changes were big and relevant by themselves separately. The short period between those changes didn't give us the time to understand them, nor the time to understand where they brought us. All 4 revolutions became an integral and inseparable part of a new era we call now reality. These changes are 1. The rise of democracies. 2. The Industrial Revolution. 3. The rise of capitalism. 4. The Technological Revolution. 5. These revolutions have pushed humanity to a new era that has changed much faster than we can adapt to and grasp. The reality of people born at the beginning of the 20th century, the middle, and the end of that period is so different that basic tools from older generations are no longer relevant to us. Moreover, in many cases, holding on to a system built on the old reality is so irrelevant to our needs these days that maintaining such a system is damaging and depressing to the young generation. It is a fact these days that the oldest generation lived a life that is not relevant to the existence of today and one we cannot maintain. Such a fast-changing reality created a gap of confusion that promoted the power grab of self-interested entities that maintain power by manipulating individuals' minds. As the manipulation of the individual mind has been used for decades, the feeling of weakness in the individual's reality regarding their influence on their surroundings, the lack of knowledge regarding their basic needs of existence, combined with the isolation of the individual in a world of fear and distraction, are the main causes for the prolonging reality, which we are so proud to call our life in the Western world. I believe that the problems of our generation are rooted in individuals' inability to understand and articulate the problems in their lives, society, and government. I hope and believe that reading this book has given you a deeper understanding of your life and the society around you. I hope this will give to at least a few of those who live with those feelings and search to understand and change the language needed. Hopefully, this language will bring us one step closer to finding a solution to this twisted reality we call life. It is time for a change, a real one, not one based on words, but one in which words are used to describe actions. As ideas never die, but populations do, the need for an actual change is necessary. It's time to build a new system in which the individual understands their role and influence in society clearly and positively. We need a system that will be easy to understand and pass on and allow the philosophy to survive without needing specific individuals. Thanks to the changes of the last 150 years, we have put together the foundation necessary for global cooperation that will benefit humanity. Those tools are available, but used these days for the benefit of the prosperity of the few and the intimidation of the many. Our society is currently maintained by individuals who have no understanding regarding their needs, are terrified of changes, and don't have the tools necessary to destroy and reconstruct the system. Such a population will be unable to maintain themselves for long periods and inevitably create a gap between the individual and their society. This gap will allow the local elite to dominate its population by the tyranny of terror and isolation. The endless good inventions have changed how individuals see themselves, their society, the globe, and the universe. Humans have created a way to communicate worldwide like never before and are aware of the rest of humanity and the planet by indirect communication. The tools needed for cultivating the earth in a manner that will promise balance are available, and large access to information to all the population for education and sharing ideas exists. Admitting that we have taken a bad turn does not mean we should be punished or feel any fear and guilt. A government has its authority from the people whom it governs, and individuals must understand their power to control and shape the future of their children, land, and freedom for a healthy society. Societies, laws, and governments have emerged to create better conditions for the individual as part of a group. When the government cannot deliver such services to its community, it should be replaced and reconstructed for the benefit of the people. A group is made out of its individual, just as a state is made out of its cities. The necessary change starts with the individual regarding their way of life in their house, society, city, and country. The communication channels, the fast movement of information, and the willingness of the people to try to create a better society and future for their children are the essence of our ability to survive. As long as we continue to educate our kids through doctrines of fear, self-concentration, and separation, we will never manage to take ourselves out of the fear of the past and never have time to think about creating a better future. We don't need to be sorry and don't need forgiveness, as it was never theirs to give or to take. The foundation for a healthy global world has been installed and mastered, and the tools needed for unification exist. The understanding that we are the only threat to ourselves is widely known, and the people's will for a better life exists. Changes start with small movements that create a pattern and evolve to a constant stream of evolution. We are the only ones in charge of our future. The time to make a change is now. Churchill said a revolution of the people is required every generation. As the reality of the 21st century is constantly showing us that the current system and government are not working for the benefit of its citizens, isn't it time to start changing it?